Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Game of Thrones Season 7, Episode 6, Beyond the Wall. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Game of Thrones, so I have to start with a spoiler warning for Game of Thrones up to Season 7, Episode 6. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So I really wanted to love this episode. I really did. There's a battle with the White Walkers and dragons, and it's effectively scary and tense, and there's a sad, effective death. So it seems to have the makings of a great episode like Battle of the Bastards or The Reigns of Castamere or Hardhome. So I feel like I should love it as much as I do those other episodes. But for some reason, I don't. For some reason I can't fully explain, there's this nagging feeling at the back of my mind that's preventing me from fully loving this episode. And after I finished watching this episode, the feeling wasn't, wow, that was awesome. The feeling I had was something more akin to disappointment. But I still wouldn't say it's a bad episode, not by any means. There were still a lot of things I loved about this episode. In fact, I would say it was an overall good episode. But for some reason, I didn't love it as much as it seems like I should have. So I would attribute this nagging feeling of disappointment to the rushed feel of the episode that it had, which was exasperated by the rush setup for the episode in last week's episode, and the fact that the ending featured what is, in my opinion, the worst case of fan service the show has ever done by far, and I am not thrilled about the implications for the future. So let's jump into this episode, which was pretty focused, as we didn't get anything with Sam or Jaime or Cersei in this episode. It was pretty focused on the quest north of the wall, but also featured a few scenes in Dragonstone, and was also a storyline in Winterfell. So let me start there with Winterfell. I actually liked the Winterfell stuff, and I didn't have an issue with them. Well, I had an issue with the way Arya acted within the story, but not the writing, as that is consistent with her character, so I bought that she'd be that dumb. So last week I talked about how it would be ridiculous for her to get mad at Sansa for writing that letter when she was just a child who watched all of her family guard and family friends slaughtered and was being threatened with the execution of her father and was being held captive herself. But the show completely sold me on why Arya wouldn't see things that way, as she made good points about like Lyanna Mormont being younger than Sansa was back then, and she couldn't imagine her behaving the same way, and the fact that Arya was saying that she would have been more defiant, which I have no doubt. But that's not to say that I agree with Arya, as I totally do not. I just buy that this is how Arya would react. But Arya is clearly being unreasonable by holding Sansa up to her high standards, because she wasn't Arya nor Lyanna. It was Sansa, who at the time was more sheltered and fragile. And more than that, Sansa said she did it to save her father, but Arya retorted, well, you were stupid enough to believe them. But the thing is, Cersei and the others actually had every intention of keeping their word, so she wasn't dumb to believe them. It was simply because of the wild card of that insane creep Joffrey that Ned died. Had it not been for him, then he would have been sent to the wall. In fact, his execution was something Tywin, the real head of House Lannister at the time, saw as a massive mistake and actually held it against Cersei for a long time. So Arya's statement about being stupid enough to believe them isn't really fair. And I also loved Sansa's reaction. I was totally on her side in this argument. Like when Arya mentioned she was at Ned's execution, Sansa was like, oh, so did you charge him and save him? That was a good point, which showed how unreasonable Arya was treating Sansa. And it was strange Arya talked about saying Sansa at the execution, because if she had, she had, but she should remember how Sansa pleaded for her father's life and how absolutely devastated she was when they killed him. And I love how Sansa was like, you should be on your knees thanking me. She's goddamn right. While Arya was off getting beaten by sticks, Sansa was retaking Winterfell, which Jon didn't want to do at first, and she's dead right. He would have lost the Battle of Bastards had it not been for her. And she makes another great point when she says that Cersei would be delighted to see them arguing amongst themselves. And this is something that frustrates me when this point just gets shoved aside like Arya does here. It reminded me when Daenerys found out out Jorah had betrayed her, and he points out this was exactly what the Lannisters wanted, but Daenerys stupidly ignored him. And here, Arya stupidly ignores Sansa. So I'm completely on Sansa's side. But overall, I love this scene because it perfectly illustrates how different the two have become, while at the same time showcasing how the feud between them remains the same, and they can't let go of past differences. So I thought this was actually pulled off really well. However, my support for Sansa starts to fall apart the next time we see her, as she's getting advice from Littlefinger, which is of course a mistake because Littlefinger is the one who is manipulating the whole situation, and in this scene you can see how much he's manipulating her here. You can see pretty much everything he says here is total bullshit. So I still very strongly believe that Littlefinger is still the master manipulator that he's always been. So here he brings up the possibility of using Brienne to help in this situation, but what he's really doing is pointing out that Brienne is just as obligated to do Arya's bidding as she is Sansa. So the effect is actually is that Sansa sends Brienne away because she perceives her as a threat, which in fact is exactly what Littlefinger wanted, because he perceives Brienne as a threat, and rightfully so. So far, he's been very effective in eliminating the threat he perceives to his ultimate goals of controlling the North, which he'd used to gain the Seven Kingdoms. So I totally disagree that he's lost his touch and he's just sitting there in his hands. I see him being just as clever and devious as ever. And with that scene with Brienne, this is where I totally switched sides to being against Sansa, as now she's the one who's being incredibly stupid, and she's falling right into Littlefinger's trap, as Brienne was spot on that she can't trust the loyalty of other guards, as Littlefinger can just buy them out. So here she's being incredibly used by Littlefinger, which is frustrating. Plus I find this whole invitation for Sansa to come to the peace negotiations at King's Landing confusing. They didn't state who sent it, Daenerys or Cersei, which I think makes a huge difference, because if it's Cersei, it's probably just a trick to get her to King's Landing to kill her. And why would either of them need Sansa to come if presumably Jon would be there, which he'd have to be because he's supplying the white? So I don't see why they need Sansa there as well. It doesn't seem to make sense. Seems more like plot convenience in order to have a reason for Sansa to send Brienne away, but we'll see. So then we get the scene where Sansa searches Arya's room, presumably trying to find the scrolls, which again is a stupid move, so now moving away from Sansa's side. But instead she finds the Arya's faces and doesn't know what's going on, but she knows something isn't right and she's terrified. And then, of course, Arya confronts her, and she's being incredibly intimidating, talking about the game of faces and whatnot. And rightfully, Sansa is really terrified of her. I was actually surprised when Arya gave Sansa the knife instead of using it against her. I'm not entirely sure what is meant by this. I don't think she was saying that she's on Sansa's side. I think she was letting her know exactly how dangerous she was and was intimidating her even more as she talks about, basically killing her and stealing her face to parade around like her. However, what I think is interesting is Sansa now knows that Arya has the ability to change faces, which is something Littlefinger doesn't even know yet. So the two of them have an advantage over Littlefinger if only they'd work together, which for the moment they are not doing, which is a very frustrating thing. But we'll see if this gets turned around. So now let me move on to the brief scenes we get in Dragonstone. We get the scene of Tyrion and Daenerys sitting by the fire, I guess showcasing that it's getting cold even as far south as Dragonstone. So I liked the scene. I thought it was a great character building scene, even if it was just more obvious foreshadowing of the Daenerys and Jon Snow romance. It was cool how Daenerys was reaffirming her faith in Tyrion while she was worried about the others, and they were smart enough to know that Cersei would be trying to find a way to betray them. Although it's good that they know, it would have been better had they actually made plans to do something about it, but whatever. I liked how Tyrion talked about Cersei keeping her temper, about Daenerys keeping her temper in check, and she was like, "What, me? Temper?" So I didn't buy that routine she was pulling for a second. Plus, I thought she was being dumb again when she was implying Tyrion wanted to see her downfall. Come on, Dany. You were just talking about Tyrion's worth. Stop this bullshit with, oh, you're betraying me every time he freaking disagrees with you. It's annoying. However, what's interesting to point out is that Tyrion is pointing out that Daenerys plans to break the wheel and be different from all the tyrants that came before her, which is far from the Mad Queen. But of course, he also points out how hard it would be to accomplish this goal and trying to keep her back on track. So it seems obvious to me that this is the show's heavy-handed way of telling us she plans to be a benevolent leader to bring about peace and help out the little guy. Now, whether this will actually happen is another thing, but it seems beyond obvious that the show is trying to hit us over the head with the fact that this is her intention, regardless of how consistent this goal is with the actions we've seen from her, but whatever. So then we get a scene with Daenerys going off to save the day against Tyrion's wishes, and the only thing I have to say about this is I'm just happy that Daenerys finally stopped listening to Tyrion's advice about doing nothing. That being said, he was right as she ends up losing one of her dragons because of this, but on the other hand, Jon and Jorah and the others would have died and they wouldn't have gotten a white, which is the whole point of them going there in the first place, so maybe it was the right thing to do after all. So now, let me finally get to the meat of the episode, the big mission beyond the wall. Now, there were a lot of great character interactions between the Fellowship leading up to the battle, and I'm glad they took the time to do these scenes. I thought it gave more credibility to this Fellowship, and it was interesting seeing these characters who never interacted before interacting. But I don't know. There's something about this whole concept that I don't buy. That it seems to be, I don't know, lack for a better term, un-Game of Thrones like. It seems something like, I don't know, Lord of the Rings or Dungeons and Dragons would do. Like have 7 characters who are totally different and don't know each other team up for a rogue mission to fight ice zombies. Game of Thrones to me has always been more about realistic battles in a political setting that's very realistically based off of medieval England times. Now in the past I've defended the show whenever it delves more into the fantasy elements, as the fantasy side of the show has always been there, but there was something about the hastily way this was thrown together that I don't buy. In short, I think there would have been a way to do this storyline that I would have bought that wouldn't come off as plot convenience. It wouldn't come off as writers obviously trying to work towards a specific goal rather than it being something of a natural story. But this isn't, because this is not how it comes off. Now again, that's not to say I hated these scenes, because I actually for the most part loved them. There was just an undercurrent of this feeling of being rushed and of plot convenience that prevented me from enjoying them as much as I should have. So I liked the dialogue scenes between the Fellowship. It was great seeing Gendry complain to the Brotherhood about selling him to the Red Witch to be killed, and I loved the Hound's response when he was talking about being stripped naked, and I was like, oh, that doesn't sound so bad. And how he was like, oh, quit your whinging. It was so like the Hound. Not that I agree with him. I actually think Gendry has every right to be pissed, and he isn't just whinging. In fact, when the Hound was like, oh, Beric has been killed 6 times, but you don't hear him bitching about it, I was thinking, yeah, but that's totally different, because the Brotherhood were the ones that almost got Gendry killed, but no one's here who killed Beric. But then I remembered that it's actually not true, because the Hound is actually there and he's killed Beric. So it's like, oh yeah, but I still think it's not the same thing and not a good comparison, but it's classic Hound. And speaking of classic Hound, I love his conversation with Tormund. That was just pure gold. Both of these characters were being so true to their characters, and to see them interact was awesome. Especially hearing Tormund talk about Brienne, and the Hound just be like, yeah, I know her. I'm more convinced than ever now that nothing will become of this Brienne and Tormund thing, and that's just a crush, but we'll see. We also get this conversation with Tormund and Jon, where Tormund seems to be scolding Jon for not bending the knee to Daenerys and implying that he's just as dumb as Mance Rayder. And I did not buy this scene for a single goddamn second. First of all, no one really died from Mance's refusal to bend the knee other than him. The wildlings were still at Castle Black, and Jon went and saved the others, which would have been the same result. So he didn't really get anyone killed for his pride. Secondly, I don't see why the hell Tormund would be, the one who's recommending bending the knee when he's always been about not doing it. And I just don't buy this advice from him. It feels like a very contrived way to push Jon to bending the knee to Daenerys, which is actually very obviously been building to all season. So we also see Jorah and Jon interact, which was cool. Actually, this is the first time since Jorah was banished in season 4 that we got a scene of Jorah actually being in character and being like the Jorah that we saw from the first 4 seasons, a wise and humble advisor, whereas the past 2 seasons he seemed like this rigid, idiotic, frowning man, which didn't seem like him. So it was cool to see this again, with him and Jon talking about his father and he refusing to accept the family sword and to let Jon keep it. I thought this was a very great, touching scene. So then we get the polar bear attack, which when I first read about this in the plot leaks, I thought it sounded really dumb. But I have to say, seeing it played out on screen, I actually thought it really worked. It makes sense that they could turn dead animals into whites as we see them riding dead horses, and this, of course, is getting us prepped to see the dead dragon. But I like this attack scene, as I thought it was rightfully tense. And we see Thoros go down, although he doesn't die until later. This is definitely the chop that causes death. And it does bring us an interesting dynamic to Beric Dondarrion, that he no longer has this priest who is capable of bringing him back to life, so he knows that this life will be his last. So then we see the Fellowship attack the Whites, and as soon as Jon kills a White Walker, the rest of the Whites immediately die, except for one, which is very convenient for our Fellowship, as that allows them to capture this White as they planned. And I try to explain this away by saying those Whites probably died because they were created by that White Walker, and so when Jon killed that White Walker, all the Whites he created died. So the implication here is this singular one white was created by a different White Walker, and he just so conveniently is alone by himself, so he can be easily captured when Jon kills the other White Walker. Seems like contrived writing if I've ever heard of it. But then they hear this barrage as Waits coming, so they know that they're fucked. So Jon tells Gendry to run back to Eastwatch, so we see Gendry run in one direction, and the others go in the other direction, and they end up in a frozen lake where the Whites surround him. Now, my question is, if Gendry is running back to Eastwatch, where in the hell are Jon and the others running to? Shouldn't they be going back to Eastwatch as well? Now, I know there are several possible answers to this. I know Gendry was sent ahead, so because he could run faster, and the whole group would go slower because they're carrying this white. But then why go in different directions? Where in the hell is this group headed? I suppose you could say they purposely ran in different directions to distract the whites, so the whites wouldn't notice Gendry, but still seems fishy to me. And also fishy that none of the whites actually caught sight of Gendry and followed him, because we know how freaking fast they are. So Gendry does get back to Eastwatch and gets Davos to send a raven, and the rest of the Fellowship gets trapped on an island in the middle of the frozen lake where the whites can't pass. And so they sit there trapped for at least one night as we see Thoros die in the middle of the night. So during this time, while they're sitting there in this freezing cold with no food or water, a raven flies all the way back to Dragonstone, and then Daenerys gets ready and dresses in her fancy outfit and gets all prepared, and Tyrion tries to talk her out of leaving, And then she flies all the way back to Eastwatch, or beyond Eastwatch, past the wall, and Jon and the others are still sitting there in this lake. They haven't frozen, they haven't starved or any combination thereof. Now, we know ravens can fly fast, we know dragons can fly fast, fine. But George R. R. Martin has also stated that Westeros is roughly the size of South America, and Dragonstone is practically on the other side of the continent. So that's a long ways to go, even assuming both ravens and dragons can fly fast. I'd give it at least 3 days since the Raven left Eastwatch to when Daenerys shows up north of the wall with her dragons. And I think even that is generous. So I find it hard to believe that they could have survived that long and this time without freezing to death or being attacked by the Whites. So I know this whole argument of travel times and the passage of times has been argued back and forth a lot, especially over the past couple of years. And you have this sizable chunk of the fan base who are very resistant to these complaints, saying it just means a lot of time has passed in between scenes, or different storylines are moving at different time rates, or it would be really boring to see them traveling, so they better not. They might as well just have them go really fast. Now, I did tackle all of these arguments in the video I did called Littlefinger's Magical Teleporter, and how all these arguments actually fall apart when you look at them further, but I have agreed that I am fine with the show being inconsistent with the passage of time if it helps them tell a better story. And when a lot of people have been complaining about it this season, I actually have not complained about this a single solitary time through any of my videos, but it's gotten to the point where casual viewers, like people who barely watch the show, are noticing this flaw. I mean, I even saw a review from this guy who literally only saw 3 episodes of Game of Thrones ever, and it was all within the past couple weeks, who's referring to Daenerys as like the Legolas queen and Jaime as handsome man in armor. And he even pointed out they all seem to be moving from place to place really fast, and he has no idea the size of Westeros. He's like, are these places like right next to each other? How do they get there so fast? So I think this dispels the ridiculous notion that only nitpicky book purists complain about the travel times, as it's become a flaw that's so blatant, and even the common viewer without a horse in this fight is starting to notice. It's like I've noticed tons of people, a lot of friends I talk to who only casually watch the show, barely watch the show, don't know much about it. Like, what's the deal with these travel times? And although it hasn't really bothered me this season, in this episode, it does bother me because they use it as a major plot point. And when the Whites did attack, and I get that they could attack on that one side, but the whole wide shot shows them attacking on all sides. But we saw in the previous scene a shitload of Whites fall through the ice and create this massive barrier hole in the ice. I don't buy that the lake is frozen over so much that an entire army can pass through it in this short amount of time. I'm sorry, but I just do not by that. But anyway, I did find this battle intense and entertaining. I really thought Tormund was going to die at one point, so I was on the edge of my seat, and it was cool that it was the Hound who saved him, because he was being a dick to him earlier, but it just goes to show that the Hound insults are all bluster, and that he is on the side of the living when it comes down to it. But this leads to another issue that I had with the episode, that not enough people from the Fellowship died, just Thoros. Yes, I know Viserys died, and we got Benjen's death as well, but in the Fellowship itself, it was just Thoros. And I expected like half of the Fellowship to die, at the very least, like 3 of them. But it was just one person, and Beric lives. Now, in episode 4, some people were complaining about the battle with the dragons and Jaime. They thought that it didn't have stakes because no major characters died. But I disagree. I actually love the battle. I don't think that we always need to get a main character dying in order for a battle to be good. But in this case, just the way that they set up this as an impossible mission and how fucked they are with all those Whites, I feel like they needed to kill at least 3 characters, and I don't think Benjen and freaking Viserion count. I mean, 3 characters within this fellowship. And it does really annoy me, the whole red shirt thing, that they bought a whole bunch of like nameless wildlings with them just so they could be cool, killed off in cool ways. I'm annoyed by this trope whenever I see it anywhere, like horror films or whatever. It's so annoying. They have these nameless extras who are just there to die. I mean, why bother with them at all? Just so I can throw in some cool deaths. Oh, isn't that cool? So anyway, once that stalemate is broken, the whites all charge in and they all start, dying. All the red shirts anyway, so they all seem doomed. But just at the exact right moment, Deus Ex Machina Danny comes swooping in to save the day. Now this moment was so telegraphed, it's ridiculous. I literally counted down when watching this episode. I was like, okay, dragons in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and as soon as I said 1, boom, dragons show up. Now I hear some saying, oh, the same thing happened with the Knights in the Vale showed up in the Battle of Bastards. But I actually think this case is much worse. For one thing, it doesn't really make sense the dragons got there so quick, as I talked about it already. But for another, it was such a coincidence that the Fellowship managed to get through all this time, like days, without being attacked. And it just so happens that they finally get attacked mere moments before Daenerys is about to show up. I'm sorry, but I think this is much worse than the Vale army coming at the Battle of Bastards. I think this is the most telegraphed Deus Ex Machina they have ever done in this show, and it was just fake and contrived. And what is made worse is the fact that they do another Deus Ex Machina just a few minutes later when Benjen shows up out of nowhere to save the day. This one actually pissed me off more because it was just so fake and out of nowhere, and the fact the show had the balls to do 2 contrived Deus Ex Machinas within the span of 10 minutes is just too much for me. I mean, they really did Benjen a disservice when he shows up, he saved Jon, and he just promptly dies. It's like, hi Benjen, bye Benjen. It made his whole inclusion in the show as Cold Hands of Benjen pointless. We don't get to know him, we don't get to care about him like we did with Cold Hands in the books. He doesn't really affect the story in any significant way. We just barely saw him last season, and this season he just pops up out of fucking nowhere, saves Jon, and seconds later dies. He's like, Uncle Benjen, and then he's dead. What a colossal waste of a potentially awesome character. I mean, god damn it. So, let's backtrack a bit to talk about the death of Viserion. Now this, I actually think, was pulled off really well. The actual death it is. It was very heartbreaking. Very well played with the music and the reaction. I love the look on all the various characters as they react to the death of Viserion. Tormund seems like he was the one who was most shocked because it wasn't just shock, it was awe, because this was his first time seeing a dragon, and to see one die so quickly after seeing one for this first time. And Daenerys, of course, was entirely heartbreaking, and that was what really drove the emotional impact of the scene. I think it was acted very well, and I think it really gave weight to this whole scene, and it was just done so well. But what's more interesting to me was Jorah's reaction, who was more looking at Daenerys than he was the dead dragon, indicating that he was actually more worried about how this would affect Daenerys than the dragon dying itself. And that's so in Jorah's character, as Daenerys is always his first concern, so I really appreciated that touch as well. But as for the actual act of the Night King killing the dragon, I don't like it. It bothered me. Overall, the way the episode portrays the Night King bothered me. He just comes off as too much of a Mary Sue. Like, he's too perfect. He's too invincible. And now, there's this theory that the Night King has green seeing powers like Bran does, and he can see into the future. And frankly, that's the only way to explain away what we saw in this episode. Otherwise, it's just bad writing. But the thing is that it hasn't been established yet in the show that the Night King has green seeing abilities. So I have to assume that it is just bad writing. Because how in the hell did the Night King know to have some of those handy dandy dragon killing spears handy? And more to the point, how in the fuck did the Night King know how to kill a dragon with this dragon spear? I mean, even if you say he has green seeing abilities, how could he throw it so well? I mean, did he win a gold medal at the White Walker Olympics for javelin throwing? I mean, I know, it's magic, just like a wizard did it. Every time you see something like that, a wizard did it. It's just too much, it's just too perfect. I'm starting to find the Night King less and less interesting because he doesn't seem like a real character to me. He doesn't have flaws or dimension. He's just like a comic book villain who's evil and perfect and knows everything and never makes any mistakes, and I just do not buy it. So let's talk about what Beric said to Jon earlier about how they need to kill the Night King. That seemed to be some very heavy and very obvious foreshadowing of how this will end. Plus his whole statement about it, well, if you kill the Night King, they all die because he made them all. But that doesn't actually make sense, as we know that there are other White Walkers who also made whites, so he didn't make them all, did he? Unless they're implying that he made all those other White Walkers too, so their creations count as his creations, and his creations would also include the other White Walkers. Then that just seems way too easy of a fix. Just kill one dude and the entire army just falls to dust. That's just too easy, and it's too annoying of a trope that I don't like to see in science fiction that I see all the time. It's just a plot device used by lazy writers, too lazy to come up with a proper solution to defeat a seemingly impossible foe. It's like what they did with the Borg in Star Trek First Contact, when all the other Borg just magically die and explode when they kill the Borg Queen. And it's not that I'm saying it's implausible. It is plausible. It's just too easy of a plot device to solve such a difficult scenario. And another thing that bothered me is that they didn't make it very clear that the two dragons survived. In fact, I seriously doubted whether or not both of them survived after watching this episode. As after the scene where the dragon dies, we only see Drogon. We never see the other dragon, Rhaegal. Now, I know logically that he survived because we only saw one dragon get killed, but it would have been fucking nice if they would have showed him flying around like Eastwatch or something like that with Drogon to make it clear that there are two dragons left. I actually think that would have been a nice way to emphasize this, and it would have been a nice metaphor seeing two dragons fly around. It's like a metaphor of what they lost. It would have been a nice shot, but we didn't get that. I don't know why. I don't know. So, finally, we come to this awesome ending where the Night King, with chains that he ordered on Amazon or something, pulls the dragon out of water and touches his head. And you know what happens then? Do you know what happens? The dragon's eye turns blue. Oh my god, did you know what this means? You know what this means? Dragon white, it's so cool. It's gonna spit fire, it's gonna go bar, it's gonna go rah, 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 and then it's gonna attack a fire dragon. We have the zombie dragon versus a real fire dragon, and they go pew, 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 rah, 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 pew, 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 and they spit fire, and they'll be like rah, 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 and they spit fire, and it's gonna get Kagangbull, and then Kagangbull's gonna happen, the mountain's gonna fight the Hound, and then Chuck Norris is gonna come in, he's gonna drop kick the dragon, and then Darth Vader's gonna come in, he's gonna use the force to choke the dragon will go, it's gonna spit dragon, and Skywalker is gonna fight Captain Kirk, and Spider-Man's gonna fight Superman. Oh my god, this is gonna be so awesome, this is gonna be so awesome, yay! So my rating for Beyond the Wall out of 10 is an 8. Extremely good. Now, I know inevitably I'm going to get a lot of people saying, an 8? Why that high? After all the hating on this episode you've been doing, why are you going to give it an 8? That's so inconsistent. But again, I have to make myself very clear that I didn't hate this episode. There were a lot of things I loved. I loved the tension between Arya and Sansa. It was great. The character building scenes with the Fellowship was great. And the action scenes were amazing. And the dragon death was so effectively tragic. So I really wanted to love this episode. I really did. But there were too many flaws and an overall rushed feeling that made me think this episode dropped in quality, especially when compared to other penultimate episodes of previous seasons. Now, I know some may think it's unfair to hold this episode up to the high standards set by Battle of the Bastards or Hardhome or Blackwater, because that is a really high bar to meet. But this is the high standard that the show itself has established. So although I thought this was a well-made and enjoyable episode, it just doesn't live up to the high standards set by the show itself. So that's it for my review of Beyond the Wall. Be sure to check out my discussion with Atkin Tomko this week with special guests of Don Willie and Don the Kraken Witt, which will be over on Atkin Tomko's channel. I'll put a link for that discussion in the description below. And later in the week, I'll do a further analysis video where I'll get more into spoilers and fan reaction to this episode, so be sure to check that out, as well as I do many more videos on shows like Star Trek, The Defenders, Dark Matter, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.